Are you working in psychedelics or taking steps to get involved? Lately, we've been thinking about the future of this field, the people who are going to work with psychedelics, and how they're going to show up. So we decided to ask them. Here's what we heard from people in a new survey who are working in psychedelics right now or preparing to launch their careers. 87.6% have been influenced by their own positive experiences with psychedelics. While 47% are incorporating psychedelics into an existing career, 31.6% are switching careers entirely. And not surprisingly, making money is not the goal. A staggering 98.3% of respondents indicate that making a lot of money is not their primary motivation to enter the field. If you're curious to learn more about this growing space and perhaps find your place in it, we're inviting you to download our new 24-page report, The Emerging Psychedelic Workforce. It's packed with insights on the field you won't find anywhere else, and it's completely free. You can find it in the articles section of our website at psychedelicstoday.com/article titled The Emerging Psychedelic Workforce.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Psychedelics Today. Today I am here with Kayse Gehret. Kayse, welcome to Psychedelics Today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Would love to have you do a little bit of an introduction for our listeners and tell people who you are and, what's your place in the psychedelic world.
Happy to. So I am based in Northern California. I lead a microdosing community that's nationwide for USA-based folks. We are called Microdosing for Healing, and we have 6-week group programs, 6-month mentorship containers, as well as one-on-one private coaching work.
Amazing. And how did you get involved in microdosing and psychedelics? Like, what was your path?
Like so many, it was very personal for me. I have been in the healing arts now coming up on, I think I'm going into my 28th year now. So I have had a lot of background in a variety of healing modalities, have studied a lot of things, done a lot of things personally. And I grew up with a grand mal seizure disorder. So I had always, growing up, shied away from anything that would destabilize my brain more than it already was doing on its own.
That makes sense.
So doing high dose or experimenting with drugs was never appealing to me and kind of a bit scary to me. But when I was introduced to the concept of microdosing, there was something that just was like, ding. And the idea that I could do something that felt more like a natural supplementation, a spiritual vitamin, if you will, over time, as kind of an expansiveness and a healing modality, not anticipating at all it would have the effect that it did end up having for me. But that sounded more appealing than high dose work at the time. So I started microdosing, and among other things, my seizure disorder disappeared completely.
Wow.
Immediately upon practicing. So I have not had a seizure or an aura, which is the precursor to a seizure, since that time. So
were you on medication before?
I was.
Like some sort of, yeah. And then wow, that's pretty amazing to hear. Did you talk to your doctors at all about that? Like letting them know that you started kind of microdosing or?
Yeah, I had many doctors in my 20s when they were trying to really get to the root of what was going on. And they never did. There was never any biological basis. And I think always deep down, I felt like it was psychosomatic, that there was something to do with trauma in my system. And it was just kind of the way my body processed oversensitivity. Where some people might get a migraine or some people might get a panic attack, this is the way my body reacted. So that's why medications, Western pharmaceuticals, didn't really work. I just had a lot of side effects. And so I really stepped away from Western medicated models of care by my late 20s. And in my
And
30s.
is that when you started to enter into that more of the holistic healing field, healing arts?
Yes. So I do, in hindsight now, I really believe microdosing really helped me deeply reset my nervous system. And I have a new set point of resiliency in my nervous system that I can move through this world and be very stimulated, yet still retain my equilibrium.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. What was your entry point into the healing arts world? Like, what were you studying? What were you
gosh,
like? Really,
that's such a good question. I don't reflect on that often. So, accidentally, I think is the answer. So, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and there wasn't a lot of exposure to the quote unquote healing arts or alternative healing.
no, not in that
It was
area,
like
PA.
the most out there thing I think was called sports medicine. And so, but I was always kind of a march to my own drummer, little kid. Like I was recycling as a kid, and I was the only vegetarian in my little town that I knew of. And so then when I got out to California for college, this whole world opened up. And I went to Big Sur. I spent a lot of time at Esalen. And that's where I had started on a very Western track. I grew up wanting to be a doctor. I was a pre-med student, but very quickly kind of as soon as I stepped into that world, I was completely taken. And I've been in it ever since.
Yeah. Any specific like modalities that you trained in or like really like interested in?
Yeah. So lots and lots and lots, but my foundation of my career was always in somatics and body work.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that's what I started. I had a private practice for many, many, many years based in San Francisco. And I'm so grateful because somatics and body work is fundamental, I think, to our healing, especially where we are in society right now. I think accessing the body is, for many people, the best first access point to their own healing.
And also can be really challenging too for a lot of folks, I can imagine.
To get in their body? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I know you're into breath work similarly, and that can be a similar, opening process for sure.
Yeah. What type of like somatic and bodywork modalities were you studying? Like, were you doing some of the bodywork stuff over at Esalen that came out of there? Or yes. Really cool.
Yeah. And they're all still there. It's so funny. I still go, and my original teachers are still there. It's an amazing, amazing place. I encourage anyone who is interested in the healing arts to put that on your list for sure as a must visit. It's a really sacred, special place, and particularly the somatic bodywork team have been doing their thing since the 60s. It's very special. So yeah, I'm very happy to have some of my roots in that place.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I would say that is definitely a bucket list place to put on if you've never visited before. So then how long ago, like when did the transition happen with when you came across psychedelics?
Yes. It did not come gently that way. So what happened was going into the pandemic, I had already, mushrooms and microdosing were a big part of my personal life, but they were not part of my professional life at all. And it wasn't something, honestly, I shared with very many people. At the time, heading into the pandemic, I had 4 healing arts studios in Marin and Sonoma counties in California. And we had a big, beautiful, diverse team but we did body work, meditation, sound healing, plant medicine, cacao ceremony to the extent that we could. And then the pandemic came. And as you know, in California, we were closed for an exceptionally long period of time out here. And so I had to do something to get through that time. And when I sat with, how can I continue to be of service? How can I continue to bring healing work forth when we can't touch anyone and we can't see anyone,
right?
Under the constraints. And so microdosing kept coming to me, kept coming over and over and over. And it was not the logical choice at the time. I looked around online. I read everything there was out there at the time. I looked around publicly, and there weren't that many people doing this work publicly, with a website at the time. But it kept calling to me. So November of 2020 is when we started, and I didn't know if anybody else was going to do this, would want to do this, and had 2 pilot groups of people doing microdosing together in a 6-week introduction. And basically, I used every resource I could find, along with my own personal experience of what it was like for me to move through my first 6 weeks, which was so unlike anything I had ever experienced before in any of the healing modalities
Wow.
practiced. And so we did two groups to start off with, and it was an amazing experience from the start. And so fast forward almost 3 years later, we're about to do our 18th and 19th cohorts.
Oh, wow.
We've
Amazing.
had about 800 people through the program at this point.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really awesome.
Thank you. And we've learned so much, so much over the last 3 years of how the process works and how unique it is for each person. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Super cool. It's so interesting, like just talking to people within like the, past few years. You have this story, right? You're like, so tell me something. And then it's like, well, da 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 da. And then the pandemic happened. And it's like, kind of like built into, like our narrative now. Oh, I was on this track doing this, and then the pandemic happened. But in your case, it sounded like it was a really nice pivot to maybe create something new and integrate microdosing into what you're doing, because you can't do in-person somatic body work with folks. So that's really exciting. It's really cool. Could you walk us through like what does that program look like? Like what are you doing in those 6 weeks?
Yeah, definitely. So on our website, I have lots of information because I feel like, well, especially 3 years ago, there was such little information. People come in with so much stigma or confusion or misconceptions about it. So I feel like having a lot of resources up front for people to explore and gravitate toward, which is, why are they being drawn to this practice? So people explore there, and then they apply, and then we figure out if the 6-week program or the 6-month program is best for them. So since the beginning, we have led with cultivation. So I'm a big believer in people growing their own medicines. And so I have a cultivation partner who created kits for everybody to make it simple and easy and supported to grow their own medicines at home, which is how we have been able to do this so openly. And so it's up to each person to judge where they are in their own comfort risk. It's rapidly changing from where we were 3 years ago to where we are today. So in the course, it's kind of a mix of education. So we have a self-guided online course that we track along with the community and the calls, weekly coaching calls, so that people can come together and share around this practice, which has been really, really beautiful, especially coming out of the pandemic years. And then there's the experience piece. So it's a very, like I say, equal parts academic and equal parts experiential.
Amazing. And what are you doing with those experiential components? Like what type of like inner work I'm guessing you're doing some sort of like inner work practices and journaling and stuff like that, but just kind of curious what you're doing there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know you're familiar with this too. It's the more supported preparation you can do with other healing modalities. It's like the mushrooms then just amplify everything. So the more people come in with that background, or they do these practices alongside their microdosing practice, it really helps bring it forth. So we weave in other healing modalities, we weave in journaling, we weave in personal development practices too, because very frequently microdosing can be so subtle, but it's so powerful. And when you're doing it on your own, or you're not witnessing yourself with journaling, very frequently people start off with, well, I don't know that much is happening. But then when they write it down or they say it out loud, it becomes very obvious quickly.
Right.
Wow, my life, I responded very differently to this or that thing, or this is how I would have communicated this last year, and look at the way that I'm speaking about it now. So we need those mirrors and those reflections as part of the process for sure.
And you probably also get that in the group. I was listening to a podcast with you last night, and you guys got into a big discussion around like the group process. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that is really important.
It is.
Part of any inner work, right?
It
is being in a
is.
group to do this.
It is. It ends up being almost everybody's favorite part, and sometimes it's very frequently surprises themselves. We have a lot of creatives in our community. We tend to draw and attract a lot of entrepreneurs and artists and healers and creative people. And they always come in and go, I'm not really a group person. So if I don't come to the calls, like, don't be offended if I don't come to the calls. And then they come religiously to the calls and are very participatory in them, which is so beautiful. But yeah, it's such a powerful part of our healing. And like I said, I think we're rediscovering this in modern times, in our modern society. Like the last 40 years, we have been so siloed. Here, take a pill, go home, take a pill. There's no connection, there's no humanity. And it's such an amazingly profound and important part of our healing that I think more and more and more the frameworks of peer-to-peer models and membership communities within the healing modalities and healing arts are going to come forth.
Yeah, and I always think about like this concept of like a lot of our like deepest wounds or sometimes those relational wounds, like a trauma can happen. And I was just thinking about this other day. I was talking to a friend about this, but like, I went through a pretty significant like physical trauma that I almost died. And like I've been able to work through that, but it's like those deeper relational wounds from like childhood that are like really harder to like shake off. And it's like those are the things that either get amplified or healed, or at least you start to like maybe work on it a little bit more in group dynamics. And then so it's like, yeah, those early wounds happen in the relationship, and then the healing also happens in relationship. And I do find that to be like an interesting thing with like group work and coming together, and especially since in the West, yeah, we're just very individualized and just like in our little kind of silos, as you mentioned, not just in medicine, right? Just in general. It's a very individualized culture. And it's like, I think a lot of people are missing community and missing kind of being in groups, especially maybe since the pandemic. I know some people really thrive during that, but
the artists loved it. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. It's funny. We have a surgeon in our community, and the first call he ever came to, I could just see him throughout the call. And by the end of the call, he was just kind of dumbfounded. He had this look on his face that was dumbfounded. And I kind of called him out on it and said, what are you thinking? And he's like, it's just flooring me how much this connection stuff works. And he said, I think I'm going to start incorporating this into my medical practice more.
Fascinating.
Just talking, setting a container of safety, of vulnerability, just come as you are, spirit to spirit, I think everybody is so hungry for that.
I think so. Yeah. And especially for a surgeon to incorporate that, it just reminded me, years ago I recorded with a doctor who wrote a book called The Art of Human Care instead of The Art of Healthcare, right? And bringing more of that human element back into medicine, because sometimes it feels really removed. And just thinking about like, and I have been chatting to like a lot of like doctors lately, just talking about like their training and, how they offer care, and it makes me like, oh yeah, like, having that human element removed when you're trying to be cared for, sometimes, life-threatening things, like you want that there, right? You want to feel like you're cared for on a human level, not just a, mechanical kind of physiological level as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was so heartening. We noticed a huge shift last summer. And we don't know what it was, but up until that time, there were a lot of clinicians, doctors, kind of like out there. Like I could feel them watching, and they followed my work, but they weren't ready to do the work yet. And then something shifted about a year ago. And all of a sudden we had applications pouring in from clinicians, and it was magic. It was like, okay, it's happening now, where they really...
What do you think was going on
they
there?
did, because I asked them, I was like, what made you, you've kind of been casing us out for a while, like what made you now, like why is now? And they said, first it was their clients wouldn't stop asking them. They said so many of their clients were coming to them curious, wanting to know more, and they felt like they wanted to take a course in a program to get familiar with it, to know when it would be appropriate and not. And moreover, so many of them are so burnt out from operating in these Western models of volume-based things. So whether it's psychotherapists trying to work in the digital health platforms, completely overwhelmed with care, doctors trying to work in the hospital system, so many of them started coming, I think, because they needed it, just like so many people in the public need it now. They needed the support and care for themselves. So by going through the program, they were getting support for their own self-care and growth. They were able to better support their clients too in the future.
It's amazing, and just kind of stresses the importance of education as more and more clients, if you are in those working like mental health professional kind of settings, like, yeah, how do you serve your clients better, right? Like being able to find communities like yours, or whatever we're doing here at Psychedelics today, and like be able to get educated, right? Because it's like, I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit of like an ethical thing there of like not needing to like maybe personally know on that experiential level all the time, but at least just having the education, the theoretical stuff behind it, because it definitely feels like this is getting very mainstreamed,
yes.
Right? Like the amount of people like I confront, and people that like I never would really think that are like into, psychedelics. Like I was just at a family party, and somebody was just talking. They're like, "Oh, this is what Kyle does," and they're like, "Oh, I have a friend that was like really interested in microdosing." It's not, I'm not interested in it, but it's like, a lot of people are interfacing. It's like microdosing seems like that entry point, and it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my dream, and this has been informed by what I've witnessed over the last 3 years, is I really feel like the majority of the public, especially now that it's mainstream, most people are not, and again, this is just my opinion, are not resourced and resilient and in a place where going straight to a high dose experience is going to best serve them. And what we have witnessed loud and clear over the last 3 years is when people take the time to lay the foundation and really apprentice themselves to their practice, incorporate breath work, body work, other healing modalities first, and they lay a foundation of trust with themselves and the medicine, then they move into higher dose work with a guide and facilitator. It is a completely different experience when that happens. So
yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot as well, and it's interesting how people typically get exposed to psychedelics like in our culture versus, say, maybe a traditional culture that maybe used them for healing or rites of passages, and how different it was, right? There was like a very long phase of preparation or like relationship building with those medicines. And it wasn't like just pushing you into the deep end. I mean, to some degree, maybe, but there's that preparation, right? And you had the cosmology in which you were embedded in that helped to support those experiences. And for our culture, we haven't been doing that. It's just like, oh, just kind of jump right into the deep end to some degree. And I don't know, have you like worked with any clients that didn't really work for, or they had really challenging experiences? And
oh, yes.
How are you helping to build that foundation with your students and clients?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I work with a lot of people who are either brand new beginners to psychedelics, which I love, or people who were like, I experimented recreationally, but this will be my first time having a practice with intention behind it. So those are most of the people I see, but we have, especially in the last year, had a lot of people who, were curious and enamored, and they rushed being, straight to a high dose experience with a guide and were completely destabilized. Sometimes mentally, but sometimes just in terms of the architecture of their life. It's medicine work, as you know, it's big honesty. It shows you big honesty. And so it's way easier to absorb little bits of honesty every day than it is to kind of be 8 hours later, wake up and go, God, everything in my life is not aligned with me at this point. And so I find when people start with an intentional microdosing practice and work their way up to higher dose work, it's far, far easier to integrate your new awarenesses into the architecture of your lived experience because of that subtlety and that patience that's incorporated into it.
Yeah, interesting analogy. Yeah, just like those little bites instead of taking like a big bite, right? Like taking little bits, letting digest instead of just taking it all in and more. I don't know. Maybe that's just also the culture we live in. What type of practices, are you incorporating in some of that foundational? Like, I know that you're trained in somatics, and are you using some breathwork, meditation, body awareness into helping people understand their nervous system a little bit more?
Yes. I think what we have seen that's so beautiful is the way nature, spirit speaks to each person so uniquely. Like some people are just very physical people. And so their healing comes in a very physical sense. Other people, it's much more emotional. Nature works through them. Other people, it's dreams. And so I think giving people the access and the space to have enough structure that they feel supported and safe and held in the container, but also enough spaciousness that they can really gravitate toward the things that call to them. So some people really love breathwork and end up utilizing breathwork. Other people love Qigong, has been another really effective, popular one. Dream work too, journaling work. It's all beneficial, but we also spend a lot of time subtracting things and editing lives too. I think we're so wired to always look for more. What can I add? What's the hack? What's the thing? That a lot of the process, and this is one of the leading reasons why I think people do need a guide and a support, a coach, therapist, whatever you want to frame it as, is we're so steeped and conditioned to think healing is outside of ourselves, that it's the pill or the mushroom doing something to us. And it's a bendy thing to kind of shift your mindset around. I've been doing this work almost 3 decades, and I still sometimes when I'm in moments of discomfort go, oh, what can I do? What can I do to ease this, to salve this, to make this move faster? When it's really resourcing oneself from in oneself and deeply trusting that the medicines are really igniting your healing potential and not something you're going to need to lean on the rest of your life. And so a big part of the beginning part of our process is yes, adding things, but it's also kind of working with that deconditioning of needing more things.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I think it's really important, right? This whole sense of like developing your own sense of agency in healing versus like projecting it outward all the time onto a certain technique, the mushrooms, the spirit, stuff like that. It's like, how do we develop our own relationship? And I'll just use like this word, like the universe, right? Like, how do we develop our own relationship to the universe, God, whatever that is, and use all these other tools as ways to maybe pathways into getting in touch with that a little bit more. And I think it's important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And for people to just be exposed to these things. I mean, so many people, that's why it's kind of like travel. It's what travel does for the human, medicine work, and being open to exploring kind of whatever path and healing modality you're being called to. More and more people are getting exposed to these things that they had never heard of or been taught before. It's really, really beautiful, the moment we're in right now.
Yeah. And where do you see this going?
I'm excited to think about it. I really think in the next 10 years, we're going to really see earth medicine and earth medicine dietas and microdosing become more and more part of everyday life. One of the fun things that happens in our programs is people move through our program and then they introduce their sister, introduce their dad, they introduce their cousin, and before they know it, they're all in the community together. And it's such a beautiful thing. And I think that's how nature works. It's very natural, it's very organic, it's very mycelial. I also see in coming forward in the future is a lot of clinicians, a lot of healers incorporating microdosing and earth medicine practice into their practices. And so that microdosing practice is introduced in a container of care where it is best. People ask me all the time, well, can I just do this myself? Like, you did this yourself, right? Like, can I just do this? And yes, you absolutely can. But oh my gosh, my experience would have been so different had I had like a Sherpa to kind of help me, mentor me through it. And so I think we're going to see a lot of healers, a lot of clinicians become familiar with this work, really benefit personally from this work, and be able to bring it forth to support other people in a really experienced, wise way.
And it feels like it's really moving that way. And it feels like the field of psychology and psychiatry is kind of at like a little bit of standstill. Like a lot of like my colleagues that are therapists, like sometimes feel like they're really kind of hitting a wall with just like the types of interventions that we have in the field. And I know probably those that are trained in psychiatry probably feel the same way about, medication. And it's not to say that medication isn't necessary. Some people really need it and really enjoy it. But to be able to add new tools and kind of like new ways of working, I think is going to be really important. Do you see that like more people will probably want to engage in the microdosing versus like medium to high doses? Like, how do you see that working maybe within those professional fields?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I can speak to what we're seeing so far real time, which is I have a large network of journey guides and facilitators that I work with, that I know that I trust, who work with integrity and love in the space, and I don't. So I really think we thrive best when we support people in the ways that we have expertise in, rather than trying to be all the things. That's very Western thing, like to think that we can do all the things. So I think being in connection and collaboration, again, I always try to look through the lens of nature and a forest. Everything in a forest has its role, and the forest would not be without every piece of that forest supporting each other in some way. And so I think that we have to rebuild an ecosystem of healing where the psychiatrists are in touch with the massage therapists, are in touch with the acupuncturists, because every person will have a different starting point for their healing journey, and different, some people move really quickly, some people move really slowly for various reasons. And so I think being in the room together, being aware of what each other does, so that we can know, sometimes I'll work with somebody microdosing for 3 months, and then I will hand them over to one of my guides that I work with, and they'll kind of take their next step of their healing journey with them. So that's how I have seen it play out real time, where we'll be kind of a networked ecosystem of healing artists.
It makes me think just around like the importance of scope of practice and kind of like staying within your scope of like your competencies, what you're trained in, knowing when it's outside of your scope and what you can work with. Because I feel like, especially maybe in the psychedelic world, it does feel like people want to be everything. right? It's like, and the reality is, it's like, no, kind of like what you're saying, like maybe figure out what you really specialize in, what you're really good at, and work in a system, and work in a team that can collaborate versus trying to take on everything. And yeah, just knowing your scope and your limitations, because that's also how a lot of harm is done. And I think maybe that's why we see a lot of the harm that's reported in this field, because it does feel like the Wild West at times, right? And to be able to really kind of stay within, yeah, what are your competencies? What are you trained in? What are you good at? And knowing when maybe I should get in touch with this person's psychiatrist instead of trying to do everything.
Yes, yeah, I think that having we have collaborative partnerships with many Western pharma doctors, who, when people come in, especially in the last couple of years, with more and more people becoming aware while simultaneously being on so many Western prescriptions, it's really, really important to have all vantage points and expertise surrounding you.
Yeah, because I am sure you probably get this question often, is like people wanting to maybe just get off their medications, and people are just kind of like, you know, asking all sorts of different people, and maybe not checking in with their psychiatrist who's doing all their med management. And it's like, you know, what types of risks are there if people, I mean, I've seen some pretty nasty things from medication withdrawal, and just people cold turkeying, you know, and you know, it's something that you should get medical like supervision over if you are doing stuff like that.
100%. Yeah. I think when something is so new, people don't have, you know, the dedicated resources aren't there yet. You know, I joke a lot with Nick and Jimmy of Psychedelic Passage that, you know, there needs to be like a psychedelic concierge service. And so lo and behold, they have, you know, expanded in such a way to serve that growing need for the public, because I get asked all the time, just because I make myself very visible in the space, but people come at me with questions out, you know, how about LSD? And I'm like, I can't answer a single thing about LSD for you. I know people who can, but just because someone is in the psychedelic world in some capacity does not make them an expert in all things psychedelic, for sure.
It's okay not to know things, right? Especially if you are being an expert, right? Like, it's totally okay not to know things. And something that I'm reminded of is that this field is so new. And it was, I think in my interview with Matt Johnson, we were talking about that, kicking things off, like feeling a little like an imposter syndrome. That people are asking me questions that I don't know anything about because this field is new. Like, we don't have all the answers. So it's okay not to know, and to really lean on your community and network. And again, I think that's where that community piece comes into play, like being able to pull people together, have that strong network. And it sounds like, yeah, you probably have a really awesome network. I mean, of over 800 people that have been through the program. And what are you doing for your community? Like, how are you building community? How are you engaging with the community, keeping them more involved?
I love that question. Yeah, I think one of my concerns, when we started and we're evolving, was how is it going to be with people who, once they know what they're doing and kind of get experienced at what they're doing, going to be able to mix with people who are brand new. And that ended up being so unfounded, because what ends up happening is the people who've been doing it for a while serve as mentors as well as inspiration and kind of guideposts for the people who are just starting out. Because one of the beauties of community and the group work is, as you move through your own process, you have your own experience, but you can look around and see, oh, wow, like all these other things are possible. And when I get there and I'm in that place, I can remember, oh, I've seen this before. This is very familiar to me. So that's what's so beautiful about the growing community. So we gather, most of our programs, we gather weekly. And then most of the time, yeah, people often ask, like, what do we do on the call? Do we No, you're not microdosing live on the call. You're doing that on your own time and your own intuition. But it's a mix of coaching questions, sharing, reflections on the course, sometimes the education, new things that are coming out in the field, because there's new things coming out in the field near daily. And then we weave in a lot of other guest experts. I have a lot of guest experts inside the course program. And then ongoing, we bring in other medicine people, but also other allied professionals who can teach them things to incorporate into their microdosing practice. So we've had everything from a clairvoyant to a breathwork practitioner to somatic yoga practices to dream work expert, so that it can kind of keep, I think part of the community, it kind of keeps people connected to their original intention, which is so important.
Right. Yeah, beautiful. And I'm wondering, something just kind of popped in my head as we're talking about microdosing. Like, is there a protocol that you like to follow, or are you kind of open on, you can
this is a
take
hot
whatever
topic.
kind of
This is a hot topic
what's
right
the best
now.
protocol?
Well, it's so funny as things get mainstream. Of course, there's the experts who pop out like, this is the way it's done. And let me assure you, there is no one way that this is done after witnessing so many people. So we love to start out with a protocol just because of our humanness. Humans do well with structure. We just really thrive on structure. And so I find at the beginning, just like any new practice, whether it's meditation or breath work, when you do things in a structured framework, at least to begin with, until you really connect with the practice, it's so helpful. And so, for example, I use the example of meditation all the time. Like if you sit on your cushion every morning at the same time for the same length of time for 90 days, and then you will be able to much better gauge your progress, shifts that you're having when you meditate on versus the days that you don't meditate. Ultimately, though, once you connect with the practice of meditation, you're going to take that connection with you and move through your entire life with that connection. Your life becomes a living meditation. You don't need to be meditating every day anymore. You will most days, but you don't have to do it to stay in that state. And microdosing is very, very similar. The goal of microdosing is not to need to microdose at all. So for some people, that can be 6 weeks. Some people, it might take a little bit longer. But each protocol and practice will be different and ultimately intuitive. Our community tends to start with the 4-3 or 5-2 protocol. We exclusively work with mushrooms, and it's usually 4 days on, 3 days off, and 5 days on, 2 days off.
Yeah. Between those two, are people reporting like maybe one's doing better than the other, or is it really kind of come back to the individual and how they're responding and how they're working with it?
It comes back to the individual. There are certain things that we've learned over the last 3 years of when people might be benefited by a protocol where there's more dosing days. And some people who show signs clues that might benefit by a slightly higher dose, less days. One great example is people who are on antidepressants and or tapering off. I feel like, as you mentioned, it can be very challenging for people. There's so many side effects, and often more extreme than they were expecting to move through the tapering process, which can take many, many, many months, slowly and mindfully. That we find that having a protocol where there's more like a 5-day dosing schedule, it just gives those people a little bit more consistent support while they're moving through the tapering process. That can be helpful.
That's interesting. Yeah. And that makes sense too. That makes sense. I want to come back to something that you just mentioned a little bit ago, is that maybe the point is you're microdosing to the point where you don't need to microdose anymore. And I wonder if you could, go into that a little bit more. Like, what are your thoughts around that? And also, maybe not just apply it to microdosing, but also just psychedelics in general.
Yes, happy to. It's even the most experienced people, I think, when we're moving through these deeper layers of healing. And we're always healing, by the way. There's no end, right?
Yeah.
We just move through the spirals more deeply. But we notice as we move through these spirals that we can handle things at such a greater capacity. It's like the same stuff keeps coming past our mirror, but we see the growth on ourselves with each subsequent pass. And so it's very, very common, especially when we get into our edginess and like a new state of growth and discomfort, to go, oh, I need more. I need to microdose again. And that's the time to still get caught in that conditioned mindset of needing something outside ourselves and not being okay with not being okay. Right? A big part of healing is being okay, is normalizing not being okay, normalizing grief, normalizing emotion, and know that we're just moving through these layers of density and it is going to pass. And so I think as people practice with microdosing, that too is why a coach, a guide, a community is so important, so that in these moments of discomfort, you don't quit on yourself or you get stuck in the shoals. You can really look and see and have supportive people around you who've been exactly where you are, moving through exactly what you're going through, and know that with each step you take and surrender to the process, there's so many gifts on the other side of that. But I think it's a deep deconditioning from thinking that we need to continuously do something to get to a state, of permanency that is not human. Right?
I think Ram Dass wrote about that, eating just thousands and thousands of micrograms of LSD at the estate, and until they finally all got really sick and they couldn't eat it anymore, and they finally came down. Yeah, I mean, this is a really important, I think, conversation, because I mean, it's interesting, and I wonder how you take this, like being in the healing arts community for a very long time. Like, when do you engage in healing and when do you disengage from it? And I don't know, I've really thought about this of like, okay, when do I really engage with it? When do I just kind of try to live my life and just be okay with what's going on?
I love this question. For me, the ultimate is to get to the point where you are just healing all the time without even being intentional about it. It just becomes part of who you are. And I think we'll know we're there as a species when we get to that, where it's just not something we need to step outside of our normal lives to do. It's just who we are every day. We don't take it so seriously. We don't have to pause and stop life in order to heal. It's just something that we're doing simultaneously.
Well, and what is
to
healing?
Life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the problems that I see right now with microdosing is it's really being positioned exclusively in the mental health framing. And so people come in equating it with another antidepressant or another happy pill that's going to fix them overnight, and you get people starting and they start microdosing and literally 2 hours later, they're going, nothing's happening yet. Okay, let's slow the roll. And yes, I think to that point, I think there's a lot of, wisdom to slowing down and thinking about doing things differently than how we have kind of boxed things up over the last 40 years. This is such a different way, a far more self-empowered way of healing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a little bit of a cutout, but I asked, like, what is healing? And I wonder, like, you said, to be able to just kind of continue and heal every day, but like, what are we searching for when we are doing quote unquote, like healing work? How are we healing on an everyday basis if that's kind of like where we're going, instead of like thinking about it of like, oh, I need to like take time off to do this. So like, yeah, how do you define healing? Like, what are we healing to begin with? And what is that process like?
Yeah. This is a multi-hour conversation, but I think a lot of it, what I see that's so beautiful, especially in the last year, it's become far more pronounced with time, is many, many people coming to healing practices, earth medicine practice, who are healing not just trauma, wounding, density in their own life, but in their lineage. Like they're almost like their spirit's like, okay, this buck is stopping here. And forever after, generations forward, will not be in these dysfunctional patterns of abuse and dysfunction or emotional patterning. So that is one answer of what I mean by healing. Like, we're healing as a species collectively, I think, right now. In our own lives, I think there's so much emphasis, there has been so much emphasis, too much emphasis on the individual, and not how our own healing then impacts our relational ability to be with others. So I have a great example of this. So a lot of my older New Englanders, I love them to pieces. They're so funny. They're like 70s and 80s, and they come in and they're like, Frank. I'll just use Frank as an example. And Frank's like, Kayse, I'm not into all this like ethereal stuff that you talk about, but I'm forgetting everything. I can't remember anything. And I read Michael Pollan's book. I changed my mind, and I kind of want to try this. And so we do. And months and months later, I talk to their spouse, I talk to their kids, and they're like, there is no way he will give the mushrooms credit, but he is a completely different person. Yes, he's less forgetful, and he remembers where his socks are now, and that's great. That's what he wanted. But he is kinder to our mother. He says, I love you to us unprompted, which has never happened before in our lifetime. He's more patient. He's more empathetic. He asks to talk to the grandkids when he calls. Like, he is a different person. And to me, it's like, these are the things we can't measure. We can't research. We can't study. The mainstream media isn't going to talk about it. But to me, this is what healing looks like in our real everyday lives.
Yeah, beautiful answer. I think that's the way I kind of like would probably try to define it as well. Like, always trying to be aware of like some of your actions, and how do you maybe make that conscious choice to do something different. Like, okay, like I feel like, I have this love I want to express. Maybe I never say it. How do I show up every day and maybe say that and tell the people in my life that I feel that way? Because yeah, a lot of it just, we can keep really constricted and not want to maybe, fully express what we're doing.
Yeah, it's really not healing to me. I think it's not really about perfecting yourself or making yourself better in some way. It's making yourself better only in the way that you can live a more full, vibrant life of service and do your thing, express who you're meant to be in your brightest, lightest way. That's what healing is. It's not a perpetual state of seeking.
Right. Which is like an interesting thing to think about when it's wrapped up with psychedelics, of always kind of wanting more, and there's always more healing work to do, because maybe things aren't going perfectly all the time, or there's like always more things to open up. And I guess, how do people like, I guess, have that discernment of like, should I do this right now? Or maybe should I take a break and focus a little bit, focus on those smaller local adjustments in my life that I can make?
I love that question. I think a big part of what we try to weave into our practice is really making space of allowing and surrendering. Nature is so much wiser than we are, like so much wiser. And we get in our own way as humans so often. And so I think we do the work. Yes, we have to bring ourselves and step two and do the work. But a lot of it is just allowing the universe and nature to take the lead sometimes, because it knows far greater, what we need. And a lot of the quote unquote problems we see with the planet, with the world, is just like nature dropping us hints in an ever increasingly loud voice of changes that we need to make as a species. So, yeah.
And change is hard for many people. I mean, I'm just including me too. And I'm thinking about those, we're talking about like maybe following nature, and trying to like really trust that process. And I'm thinking about some clients I've had in the past that carry some pretty significant traumas, when either nature, the universe, or the world really kind of betrayed them. And I'm wondering, how do we develop maybe that discernment or that trust to maybe let go of whatever is going on to make a change? I think this is probably like the hardest part around creating change, is like actually following through and trusting that process, but discerning how to make those decisions as well.
Yes, that's an excellent point, because the neuroplasticity and the opening that this work allows is all for naught if we don't change, if we don't change it simultaneously too. So, yeah, I mean, some people are very, very, very invested in resisting change, their identity, whether it's their identity as a victim or their identity as a diagnosis. I am this thing. And so it can be really uncomfortable and unfamiliar to consider yourself in any other way other than
Right.
that. So, and that's the invitation that medicine work is giving to us. And I think that's why we have to have the support and inspiration around us to help us step into that deep discomfort sometimes.
Yeah. You're talking a little bit about like neuroplasticity, and we're talking about change as well. We know with more of those macrodoses, there is that kind of like window of opportunity, that critical window. Are you seeing something similar with microdosing, where people are a little bit more open, fluid, they're able to make changes a little bit easier, like maybe not like overthinking things? And it's a tricky thing, especially with like the macrodoses, where, we say, don't make any big decisions for at least like a few weeks. If it feels like a big decision, wait on it. But there is sometimes that window of opportunity where it's maybe you've been ruminating on it for so long, and you finally get like this motivation, right? Because you have this new way of thinking, you've opened up these new neural pathways, you're like, okay, I have the courage to do that. How does that work with microdosing?
Very similar. Very similar, just more subtle. Yeah, I don't think it's although we have, especially people who have laid the foundation of a long, long history of decades of contemplative practice and work, sometimes their shifts, their awareness just from microdosing can be pretty profound. But for the most part, that's why one of the things I love about steady incremental microdosing practices, as we have these awarenesses, we can make these changes and shifts in a very thoughtful way. And integrated into our lives. But yeah, I definitely have seen people. That's, I think, one of the most, if I think about what people say most frequently, like a few months into practice, that's one of the major things is, life comes at them and this disappointment happens, or this happens, they don't get their way in this capacity. And they realize, gosh, I've responded to that so much differently than I would have ever. So it's moving through life, not just with more resiliency, but more perspective, a broader spectrum of emotion, and also an opening of the possibilities of what that could mean. So instead of going, this person doesn't want to date me and I really wanted to date them, you think like, oh, well, maybe I'm supposed to work with them, or maybe
Right.
I'm supposed to, they know someone, or I know someone that they're supposed to know. And so life takes on this hugely more expansive thing where I'm just not the center anymore, where I'm just part
Right.
of so many possibilities that can happen.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, just thinking about like feeling like this just rejection right off the bat, right? It's all about me, versus like other possibilities, like maybe asking that question, why did this person come into my life, right? Like what was the exchange that happened there? I'm curious, we're talking about a lot of the benefits. I'm wondering, if you've had clients or students have any challenges with microdosing. Like, what are some of the challenges with it?
Who quits? That's what people want to. Who quits?
Yeah.
So yes, I'm happy to answer this question. I'd say the number one thing, and it's super seldom, I'm going to say a handful of people out of the hundreds and hundreds we've worked with, is people discontinue practice because they have too much emotion come up. And sometimes it's just they're in a place in their life where they just can't handle, if things were different and they didn't have so much on their plate and so much responsibility, but the timing is just bad, where the intensification of emotion and things coming up for clearing is not good timing. And then some other people are so uncomfortable with being in their body, so uncomfortable with feeling their feelings fully. They've usually been like lifelong distractors, workaholics or smokers, or they're stuffers and hiders from emotion, that they want the medicine to make them happy or more productive at work, and they're not allowing for the fact that healing doesn't mean being happy all the time. Healing doesn't feel good all the time.
Right.
So that's the main thing. And then the pharmaceutical, to people who are on a lot of other pharmaceutical interventions too. It's not that they can't microdose. It's just, it takes more patience and more support.
Right.
There's more variables to consider.
Yeah. The person I was chatting with just a couple days ago, that they said their friend was doing it. I think they mentioned they stopped because they were feeling a little too anxious. Like it was just a little too much for them. And as you're saying, like, being uncomfortable with emotion, it makes me wonder if, they had a container to work through that, would they stick with it? On the other side of it, I think it was like, I remember learning about this during part of the MDMA training back in like 2016. So it's been a while. I might kind of butcher this or forget all the details. But I think they actually mentioned the group that got the 60 milligrams of MDMA, it actually made them more anxious and kind of exacerbated some of their PTSD symptoms, even though they were in that container. And so it makes me wonder, just this kind of question of like, there's anxiety that we can work with and there's like emotion that we can work with. But sometimes you teeter on that edge where it's just in your nervous system and it's not fully bringing it to the surface. And how does that maybe exacerbate things? And I wonder if that also happens with microdosing. Like you just kind of teeter on the edge a little bit. It's like you're not fully there. You're kind of back and forth. And then it's actually might be harder to work with to some degree.
That's when the group work is so helpful, because not only are you surrounded by people who are moving through the same thing or have been where you are, who can normalize that. And it's not that you're having a bad reaction or that mushrooms aren't working for you, which is how a lot of people read the situation. They're just not working. And it's like, well, actually they're working a little too well is what's happening. It's interesting. So if you go down the microdosing Google rabbit hole on Reddit and things like that, anxiety is the most mentioned thing for side effects of why people don't continue. We have not found that at all, which is so interesting. And I don't know why that is. I think what we have seen the most is grief comes up. Fatigue is also really, really common. And it was a mystery for a very, very long time. But we've seen enough people move through it that we have a solid hunch at this point that what has happened, the people who tend to get hit with fatigue the most are people whose nervous systems are the most deeply in need of a reset. They are the kind of pushers and hustlers and overachievers, and they're always like getting 16 different certifications and their PhD, and they're like running a family and a team at work, and they're never still. They're actually really uncomfortable being still. And so nature just kind of clotheslines them and takes them out. And it's so frustrating for them because they look around and other people in the group are having, these amazing, productivity and like creative expanses happening. And they're like, I'm just taking naps all the time. Nothing really exciting is happening. What is actually happening is their nervous system is being deeply, deeply rewired on a fundamental level. And they just need to allow it and come through stronger for it. So that's when I think the group, when emotions come up that are less easy to work through, it's really, really nice to have that support. To also include, I think, too, a group is helpful and resourced experience is important, because I think when you have energy come up, really knowing what to do with it in a healthy way can be really, really productive. Like anger is a big one. Like the people who tend to have like irritation, crankiness, anger come up are always the people pleasers. they're the people who are like never, so they're like go with the flow in their marriage, you know, and their team at work. They're the quiet ones who just kind of go, and they don't use their voice. They have this little fire come up in them. It's interesting. And they're so uncomfortable because they're like, I'm not an angry person. Like, why am I just irritated at everything this week? And it's just, it's that little fire, and it's anger is just energy at the root. And we can take that and direct it however we want. And so it can be passion, it can be creativity, it can be love, it can be any which way we direct it. And so if we have emotions arise through earth medicine practice, and then we can work with it through breath work, through acupuncture, through energy work, through physical movement for some people, it's really, really supportive on so many levels.
Yeah, and those examples that you just gave, it just got me thinking about like using that as information. Like somebody like a people pleaser, they're starting to experience anger. Like, what does it feel like to set a boundary, or, you know, use your voice a little bit more, right? And actually like move that. For those that are like, you know, overproductive and doing too much, like, yeah, what does it feel like to just chill out a little bit? When you mentioned that one, I kind of just was chuckling inside because I have had some breathwork experiences where I fall asleep or nothing happens and I get really irritated. I'm like, I was supposed to do this like big clearing. And then I have to pull back and go, I've been going like 1,000,000 miles an hour. I actually just needed this rest. I don't, you know, and it's like, again, it's like you kind of get what you need, not always like what you're looking for and what you want. And those are like really important reminders. But I think sometimes the way that we always talk about our experiences, especially those big experiences where it's more kind of positive or breakthrough oriented, you know, it's not always the case for a lot of folks, right? And to really maybe trust like, well, I really just needed to chill out and take a nap because I'm doing 1,000,000 things. And that's okay. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But hard to accept that if you're that type of person.
It is. And it's also, yeah, we're so wired in our human understanding of things. I mean, nature is always seeking balance, right? Like always. Like every species will adjust and evolve in a way to adapt itself to what nature needs. So we're doing the same thing when we're healing. It's counterintuitive a lot of times to kind of our human way of doing things.
Yeah. So I see that we're over the hour. So I'm curious. Yeah, like, well, I think you kind of mentioned what you're excited about. What's on the horizon for you? Like, what are you looking forward to with what you're doing and just the field in general?
Yeah, gosh, so many things. I think most is just a continuous learning and revealing of how we can incorporate nature more and more into our healing, into our evolution. I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited about all the changes and shifts that are going to come ahead in the healing arts and healthcare professions at large. There's going to be so many novel ways of delivering health and healing to people in the years ahead. I'm super excited to be part of that and witness that and support that.
Amazing. Yeah, it is an interesting time in human history. That is for sure. And yeah, exciting to know that psychedelics will hopefully be a part of all this. Kayse, thank you so much. Anything that you want to pitch or let people know that's happening? Like, how could people find out about your courses, your offerings? What's your website? Any upcoming kind of info?
Yeah, I invite you all to connect online. I'm very active on social media and sharing our work and what we're witnessing. I'm on all the platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, probably primary. And then on our website, we have lots of free resources. There's for beginners, there's an introductory workshop that people can check out. We also have the Microdosing for Healing podcast, which is super fun if you want to learn from a variety of voices in the space. That's a good place to check that out. And then we have ongoing programs throughout the year. So our 6-week immersions tend to be seasonal. Our next one after autumn begins in October, then we'll have another one beginning in the winter of 2024. And our 6-month container is evergreen, and you can join that anytime. So yeah, we welcome all of you.
Amazing. Is that Microdosing for Healing cross platforms, or were you kind of pitching your name for for Instagram and all that stuff?
Oh, on Instagram and LinkedIn, I'm under my name, Kayse Gehret.
Oh, okay, cool.
And our website is microdosingforhealing.com.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, Kayse, this has been really fun. Really appreciate your time, and loved learning about everything microdosing today.
Thank you so much for having me.